had a candidate who said, I need a 60% hike. That's very nice. I'd love one too. But why do you need a 60% hike? Usually your justifications will be, I'm either underpaid in my current job, I'm moving to a more complex job, or it's a higher risk situation. So we were expecting one of those answers. To be fair, he was very candid and he said, because from my batch of business school, the highest paid person is on X salary. This was a well-known promoter in the retail industry, and he wanted us to hire a CEO for one of his businesses. He was quite sort of, what value will you add? I know everyone. Why do I need to come to you? Which was all fine. We had those answers. We had to bring a little bit of a mirror saying, these are concerns that people externally will have when we approach them. A lot of people would start by saying, I'm not looking for a job, but I'm curious. That's when you know you can hook them in. Kind of senior leadership that would actually start looking at an opportunity only because of trying to get their salary benchmark is fewer. However, there are a lot of people who will start a conversation and then actually discover that their current employer gets interested in paying them more. There was a time client told us, get me someone who's IIT IIM and 25 years in Unilever. And we said, okay, wonderful, we can do that, but will that actually work for your organization? If someone, for example, has stayed within one industry, one company all their lives, it shows longevity, it shows loyalty, but it may not necessarily result in learning agility. A lot of multinationals will have set norms on what can and cannot pay, whereas Indian companies will have a little more flexibility. Let's say you've accepted a job and your current employee comes back with something which is a counter offer and it's attractive. Have the ability to have that conversation. I am one of the rare people in the industry who can say I was born into recruitment. I probably learned how to read a resume before I learned how to read. The reason being, my father, Dr. BP Agrawal, was the founder of the first recruitment company in the country, which is ABC Consultants.
Hi, Toral. Welcome to Sell-Side Conversations. Thank you for taking your time on a Saturday morning.
Thank you for inviting me on this, Gautam.
Perfect. So, Toral, you've been a veteran in the recruitment business.
Veteran makes me feel very old. I should warn you.
I was the experienced person. Okay, that's right. You've been an experienced person in this business. You've seen the industry evolve. So, we'll talk about a lot of those aspects of the business, recruitment, hiring, and various facets of it. But let's begin from a little background. Can you just give us a little introduction about your background, your education? How did you get into recruitment business?
Okay, that's an interesting one actually. So I am one of the rare people in the industry who can say I was born into recruitment.
Oh, really?
So I started actually, I probably learned how to read a resume before I learned how to read. The reason being, my father, Dr. BP Agrawal, was the founder of the first recruitment company in the country, which is ABC Consultants. And so as kids growing up in Calcutta, we were in school and he would come home with these stacks of resumes in those days. I'm talking of a long time ago. We literally, I've drawn mustaches on some of the photographs and done silly things like that, but literally, grown up with this. But so I grew up in Calcutta. Did all my schooling in La Martiniere, best school in the world, and then moved to Bombay for college. Went to Sydenham, and spent 3 years being an outstanding student because I was standing outside more than I was inside. But no, it was a fun time. I also sort of had my first taste of Bombay, freedom, living in a hostel, all of that stuff. And as soon as I finished my graduation, I was planning to go on a holiday. I was thinking about what I should do. And that was when my father said, nothing doing. Come and join the business. I need you. So that's when I joined ABC Consultants in those days.
In Mumbai or?
In Mumbai. In Mumbai. I chose to join in Mumbai. Once you move to Mumbai, you can't move it. You can't go back.
True.
So yeah, I that's how I sort of got into recruitment. Along the way, of course, there were a few hiccups. At one point, I decided I didn't want to be in recruitment and I wanted to be in either hotel management or advertising.
Oh, really? Okay.
And to give my father credit, he didn't say no. He pointed out a few factors about the hospitality industry, which made me quickly realize it was not for me. And then he packed me off for an internship in the advertising industry.
Okay.
I think a month and a half of working in advertising was enough to tell me that I probably was not cut out to be in advertising. And, that's when I said, okay, this is a interesting industry. Let me get into it. So started off in recruitment. In those days, there was no differentiator between leadership, junior.
And this, I would imagine, would be in the early 90s.
This was to be specific, in 1993.
93, okay.
So it's been 32 years. And at that time, ABC did everything.
Okay.
So we had one day you'd be working on an area sales executive assignment. The next day you'd be looking for a CEO for a company. The third day you'd be looking for a secretary for the CEO of the company.
Okay.
Of the three, the hardest search was the secretary to the CEO, for sure, without a doubt.
It always is.
Yeah. But, this was also the time India was going through liberalization, a lot of changes, a lot of multinationals coming in the country. And with that, my sister and I had both joined the business at that time. And we kind of kept hearing about this concept of executive search.
Okay.
Initially, we thought it was just a gimmick. Some of these firms are making up to charge clients more fees. But then we decided to research it. So we actually went around the globe, researched what this concept of executive search was. Was it really different from what we had been doing all along? And we realized actually, yes.
So it must have gone to US, UK, all these developed countries to see how things work.
Absolutely. And we realized it was actually a completely different process, a completely different product offering. That's when we actually set up Accord India, which is the firm that the two of us run.
And which year was this?
This was actually, it had a journey, but it started in the late 90s.
Okay.
We first sort of dabbled with it a little bit to check that it was something that fit. In 2001, we officially became Accord India.
Accord India, okay.
So, and ever since, been on the search end of the business.
And you've always been focused on the top end of the...
Ever since we've been in search, yes. So Accord does only leadership
roles. We'll talk about that.
Yeah. ABC, of course, does a wider spectrum of roles.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. So now you're in the recruitment space and also only at the top level of the pyramid. So let's talk about that. How does that work? Just give me a sense to our audiences. How is the recruitment at the top level working? Let's say, and mostly these are CEO roles, or it could be CFO roles, or only with the C title roles.
Okay, so let me actually give you a little bit of a pyramid on the industry first, so that becomes clear what we do and what we don't do. So I think now the recruitment industry is fairly mature, and there are three broad segments you'll see. One is the top of the pyramid. Obviously, like all pyramids, that's the smallest piece. That's where you look at typically board roles, CEO roles, CXO roles. This is a very, very critical hire for any organization and hence has a completely different approach to it. Then you have the middle band, which will have typically CXO -1. Some of the smaller CXOs might also fall in that. CXO -1 going all the way, let's say, to a brand manager, if I had to use a. And then you have the bottom layer, which is feet on the street.
Feet on the street.
Okay. It could be white collar. It could also be blue collar, right? So these three segments in recruitment have different firms that really cater to that. So the top end of the pyramid is where you'll find executive search firms like ourselves. The middle segment is, so the largest firm is our group company, AGC Consultants, but you have a bunch of other firms in that space as well. And then the bottom end will typically be more project hiring.
Project hiring, okay.
Right. So that's the sort of recruitment landscape. You also have something called an RPO, recruitment process outsourcing,
okay,
which cuts across a little bit, where you put people into client offices to actually manage the whole recruitment process.
So it's understood. The teamless model, that is how it works. Okay.
Yeah. So yes, our focus is completely only leadership.
On the top end leadership. Now, in the leadership space, now, Walk us through a process. How is a CEO hired? Where does it need start, and what is the journey of it? Does it come from either somebody's exiting or the board realizes we need a new CEO because the business dynamics are changing? Just sort of give us a few flavor of this.
So I think what you're talking about is what we call context, right? Every organization goes through a certain journey. Um, a lot of roles come up because someone quits and therefore they need a replacement. If they don't have an internal successor in place, very often they will go external. That's the sort of simplest situation. You could also have situations where the company is going through a major change. So let's say they're going in for a listing. Very often, or they are bringing in external investors. Very often, for example, the CFO skills they need changes.
Absolutely.
They may have been traditionally more accounting, planning skills. Now they need more front-facing skills, investor relations, audit and things. So that could be a reason for change. Sometimes a company is not performing the way it should, and promoters or the global headquarters decide it's time to make a change. Those searches tend to be trickier because they're a little more discreet, a little more confidential.
Okay.
Because there is an incumbent, you have to deal with some of those dynamics. But there are various situations, and sometimes, of course, it's a startup company or it's a company where the private equity investor has come in. You have promoters who've been running the business. They've decided to professionalize, so they want to bring in senior talent.
So those are three scenarios that play out when the senior.
Those are the most common.
Most common.
Then there'll always be peculiar scenarios.
So let's pick up one scenario which you described where the board isn't happy with the performance of the incumbent.
The first one.
Can you give some examples of that you've dealt with, and then just walk us through that process?
So, I can't name any names because our whole business is about discretion and confidentiality. But I think it happens often enough where it doesn't happen overnight. So boards don't suddenly wake up and say, hey, you know what?
Yeah.
But it's a process where they start getting uncomfortable. Now, if there is, for example, an integrity issue, then it can happen overnight.
Okay.
And that's something that boards are pretty tough on nowadays. But otherwise, they will usually want to get a sense of what does external talent look like. What can they bring in that will actually be better or different and will therefore bring that change. I think it's very critical at that time to understand the real motivations for making that change, because that then ties into what kind of person you look for that organization. So, and I'm trying to think of how I can describe any situations without naming names. But let's just say, many companies have actually gone through this process. And really the tricky part is to identify what is good in what the incumbent has brought to the table and what do they want to change. Because very often boards don't articulate it as clearly. Once you have that clarity, you know what is the change that.
How do you get the clarity? Because you are an external to the organization. So
a lot of homework and a lot of questions. So when we go into a client scenario, before going into the client conversation, we would have done a fair amount of homework on the organization. We have a wonderful team that puts together a lot of data. This comes from both secondary research, but also the many conversations we have as a search firm sort of feeds in, and we keeping that information handy. That's when you sort of have your set of questions. You have your market information that you're playing back. In addition to that, there's a lot of discussion. So we often say that in the search process, you probably spend, or the most important time you spend is in getting the brief right.
True.
Everything else follows after that. And therefore, sometimes you have to ask slightly harder questions. So we had a situation many years ago. This was a well-known promoter in the retail industry, and he wanted us to hire a CEO for one of his businesses. He was quite sort of what value will you add? I know everyone. Why do I need to come to you? Which was all fine. We had those answers. But then we had to ask him questions. We had to bring a little bit of a mirror saying, these are concerns that people externally will have when we approach them. How would you like them addressed? And, promoters are people you have to walk with carefully on some of these things. But he was very open. So we actually said to him that, look, the perception of your company is we're a Lala company,
Okay.
right, today. And to be fair to him, he took it on the chip and he said, okay, how do we counter it? So I said, okay, give us data. What do you do? What are your processes? What do you have in place? And at that point of time, we actually realized he was one of the few listed companies in his sector.
Okay.
Okay. So actually, the worry that candidates had that this was a promoter-led company with very little transparency, etc., was the opposite, because his data was the most available data in that industry at that point of time.
Correct.
Right? But someone had to walk through that journey and then get that insight out. Once we had that, it became easy to talk to people and explain to them, what changes. So it can be questions like that, and that you have to sort of force certain discussions. It can be more straightforward, standard questions. And
There's a lot of research that goes talking to people, primary, secondary research, understand it. Like you said, the brief has to be right.
The brief has to be perfect.
So once the brief is right, then you are
Absolutely. Yeah.
Now, how does the process of finding a candidate begin? Do you start with LinkedIn, or where do you start the process?
So I would say it starts 25 years ago, because there are people we have met when they were sort of young brand managers, marketing heads, etc., who are today CEOs of companies. And all of that data sort of
You have the data for last.
we try, yes.
Wow.
Some of it is in our heads, unfortunately, but now we have a pretty good system to actually capture it.
Okay.
But no, when you actually start a search, the first step is understanding the brief. From there, we will make recommendations on what are the competencies that you actually need for the job. Where do those competencies exist, right? The most obvious ones are their competitors, because that's clearly where you expect to find the talent. But sometimes it can be many layers removed from that. So again, I'll give you an example.
Okay, yeah.
Similar retail example, actually same promoter. And he said, okay, fine, I'm convinced. Let's get started. So he said, where will you look for this talent? I know everybody in retail. It was a very small industry at that time. So there's nobody I want from retail that I don't already know. So where are you going to find this talent for me? So we spent some time with him. We said, okay, one is within your sector, retail. Yes, you know most people, not everybody. But B, a lot of people have their own biases or prejudices. So if you call someone up, they may not answer you in quite the same way, simply because they have questions about the organization which they can't ask you.
True.
But when we call them, we may be able to walk them through a journey. So he said, okay, fine, few of those. We said, you're in, at that time, grocery retail. So we said a next obvious one is the consumer industry. FMCG as a sector, it's been the mothership of talent in the country in any case. And, they bring skills, they understand the product, they understand, they've sold to retail, etc., etc. So he said, okay, fine, that makes sense. He also had an apparel segment. So we said, we can look at apparel companies. That's also fine. So this process, we moved certain layers, and then we said we could look at telecom. At which point he said, you've gone completely crazy. Till now you make sense. This makes no sense. So we said, give us a moment. Let us explain why we're saying this. So we said, what are you looking for? You're looking for a leader who has handled change and ambiguity, because your industry is going through a fair amount of change, has handled regulatory, because again, your industry is going from unorganized to organized, has handled scale, because that's where you're headed and what you want to do, has handled large teams of people, feet on the street, as well as sort of corporate level people, and has that hunger for growth. What does Telecom have? Telecom has two kinds of people at that time. You have people who come from the technology side of telecom, clearly not them. But you have a lot of circle CEOs who've come from consumer, right? Who have, after coming from a structured consumer FMCG background, have come into this crazy world of telecom at that time, which is constantly changing, constantly evolving, has dealt with more regulatory change than most other industries, has dealt with faster growth tracks than most industries, that becomes obsolete overnight and has to sort of relook at it. That has every day is a new day, every minute lost is a minute lost, right? And they deal with large teams of people. And he sort of looked at me and said, I didn't think of it like that, right? So this is something that we do. We help clients think through some of these. Then comes the task of actually finding these people, and there are many methods. I won't name all of them because
But the most commonly ones,
so the most
senior level, because I know for the mid-level, LinkedIn or Naukri, all those things
I'll
are
tell you what we do actually. I will let you into a little bit of the secret sauce. Yes. So what we actually do is once we've agreed that these are the spaces people could exist in, we will actually look at who are the companies that resonate the most closely. It could be scale of company, it could be culture, it could be a whole host of factors. It could be location sometimes, right? And we will then go out there and research all the talent that is in those companies at that level.
Okay.
Okay. Now that research, that we use, LinkedIn is one of our best friends. We use all kinds of media. We have our delivery team is trained in how to actually make calls, how to get information out. We obviously do a lot of referencing through contacts we already have. And, that's where the history of 25 years comes into play because you can pick up the phone and get a lot of information. There's a lot of public data available. Company balance sheet has data, social media has data. So we use all of that. And of course, we have, based on prior searches, there's obviously people that we've already researched. So through that, we would actually put together talent that meets the brief that we have. We would then spend time using our knowledge of that talent to scan through the ones that are most relevant. Some cuts are obvious. So sometimes age is a cut, sometimes location is a cut, sometimes the size of business they've handled is a cut, sometimes the complexity is a cut depending on what your situation is. Sometimes gender is a cut.
Gender is a cut?
A lot of clients want gender diversity and hence women leaders.
Okay.
So that can be a cut. And, there are lots of things. But essentially, we will then boil it down to a smaller group of people that are the most relevant, that fit the parameters that we had for a particular search. And then we will start the process of approaching them. Now, that's one of the big differences between executive search and regular recruitment or contingent recruitment, as we call it. Contingent recruitment will start from a database or an ad and then select. So it's actually called selection.
Okay.
Because you take an available candidate who's looking for a job, who applies to you in some form, and select within that.
Okay. So people can apply on Monster or no.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Whereas executive search is actually, it comes from research. So you start with the premise that you're looking for a certain skill set.
Okay.
Okay. You don't start with the premise the person is looking for a job.
Correct.
Okay. Part of the process is once you have identified people with the right skill set, how do you get them interested in this job? So the person may never have made a resume. The person may not be actively in the market in any form. But that's part of the process in executive search. So because these are senior roles, because these are critical hires, you are literally looking for the best fit for the job, right? And not just the most available fit for the job.
Got it. Can you give us an example of somebody who was just never looking for a job, but you managed to convince him that here is a great opportunity?
Oh, that happens every day. Every day.
So why
we'll call someone and they will say that, but I'm very happy, where I am, or I'm comfortable where I am. And that's where our homework in terms of why is this opportunity genuinely better for the person? What could be some of the pulls and pushes that are operating with this person. This is all homework we do before we make that call.
Okay.
Right. And, a lot of people would start by saying, I'm not looking for a job, but I'm curious, right? That's when you can hook them in, because that's when, if you have the proposition right.
Really, what percentage of people say I'm curious?
Oh, a very large percentage,
Okay.
including people who are looking for a job.
Okay.
So, it's easier to say I'm not looking and I'm curious than to say I am looking for a job at that level. So, yeah. But no, it's some of the biggest names in the industry are people that the conversation could have started like that and then led to a certain.
And the motivations are obviously for a job, but is it also for salary? Because some people start fishing around. What is my market value? How much does that happen?
So at the very senior levels, it happens less because they have more to lose in terms of information leaking out that they are even contemplating a role, right? There is more discretion that they need. There is more they have limited time as well. And hence, there is less time to do some of the things. There are other ways to get that information without going through that route. But it does happen. I would say there are two scenarios. The kind of senior leadership that would actually start looking at an opportunity only because of trying to get their salary benchmark is fewer. However, there are a lot of people who will start a conversation and then actually discover that their current employer gets interested in paying them more. And then that's when the whole salary benchmarking thing becomes more serious.
Oh, interesting.
So,
That's how it works, huh?
yeah.
So you also mentioned that discretion. Just talk us through what is the level of discretion? Some crazy examples of discretion, or is it just normal?
Look, let me put it this way. If I am talking to a CEO of a listed company, right, or who's running a multi-billion-dollar business, right, and if word gets out that he is even contemplating a change, it can have a direct impact in terms of the stock price of that company. I mean, it's as
simple
simple as that, right? And therefore, when we are talking of leadership talent, you have to be absolutely paranoid about confidence.
So you have to bypass his secretary, his PA, and then go straight to him. That is what happened.
Thank God they invented mobile phones, because before that, getting through the secretary was the hardest part because they used to control that very, very carefully. Now, of course, with mobile phones and numbers being more easily available, the chances are you will get to the individual much more easily.
So in this cases, it's only one-to-one with the individual.
Yes, absolutely. Otherwise, there can be a lot of trouble that happens.
Interesting. So when hiring for a CEO, CXO kind of roles, what are the important attributes that the board keeps in mind? 2 or 3 general attributes that are must-haves. Okay, the thumb rule.
So it's something we call the fit for the role on a more holistic level. But if I had to pick sort of 3 things, I think the first thing they look for is, can the person do the job? So do they have the skills? Do they have the experience? Do they have the technical knowledge? Whatever you need. The second thing they look for is, will the person do the job? Do they have the motivation to do the job? And the third is, can they do the job now? Which means, can they operate in the context of that job and be able to do what they have to? So that's the sort of 3 broad buckets. Then there are a lot of additional attributes, that keep coming up. I think the first is always context. For us, very often we have to remind clients, you're not looking for the best candidate. You're looking for the best candidate for this job. And there is a difference between the 2 things, right? There was a time someone would tell us, a client told us, get me someone who's IIT IIM and 25 years in Unilever. And we said, okay, wonderful. We can do that. But will that actually work for your organization? Do you have the structure and processes and systems in place that he is used to after 25 years in Unilever? Do you have the kind of team that he is used to? There are things that get done in a Unilever Your organization is younger. It is in a growth phase, etc. So, at which point the client realized that, okay, maybe someone directly out of Unilever into my organization, not best fit. Right? So that is one thing that they look for is context. So it's scale, it's complexity handle, it's geography, a whole host of factors. Then you get into slightly more specific attributes. So you'll have strategic and commercial sense at that level. You will have results orientation, someone who actually gets things done, because the day of armchair CEOs is, professor or CEOs is, I think, gone. And people want action, people want results. You'll have values. So working in certain values of the organization is important. Ethics, governance has become very important. The ability to manage varied stakeholders. And today it's really varied. You have internal stakeholders, you have external stakeholders, and the ability to just do all of that at the same time. The ability to lead teams, to build teams, to motivate teams, to hold teams, to excite teams, to create that vision, that passion. It's a long list
Those are
of
some of
things.
the important attributes.
Yes, that people are constantly looking at nowadays.
And then obviously
Learning agility, very big one nowadays.
Okay. Really?
Because with the world changing as quickly as it is, what worked yesterday, even if you're a veteran from that industry and have always worked in it, may not be what will work tomorrow.
So how do you gauge the learning agility?
So I think a lot of what we look for is past experiences, past examples, so things that they have done. So if someone, for example, has stayed within one industry, one company all their lives, it shows longevity, it shows loyalty, but it may not necessarily result in learning agility, right? Versus someone who's, let's say, got a base in one company for the first 10, 15 years of their career. And then they've actually gone and tried out different industries. They've tried out different kinds of companies. So, from the very large global MNC to something which is more promoter-led or something which is a little more startup-ish, etc. And what they talk about their learnings from that. So it doesn't have to be positive learnings. Sometimes they actually say, hey, you know what? I went to this different environment and I learned what not to do as much as I learned what to do. Right? And therefore, you have to be able to pick and read between the lines of what they're saying when you're actually going through an interview process.
But does it help to have a person in the dynamic world that we are today, a person with 25 years in one company? Is that candidate still relevant?
It depends.
In a very senior roles, because
It depends on what you're hiring for.
okay,
So
that
context,
that is
right?
what-
If your organization is a mature, stable organization that has, let's say, similar levels of structure, process to it, then actually you want a leader who's used to that,
Okay.
because that's how your organization operates as well, right? So you have to look
Got it.
at traits. There was an interesting example of someone who had worked with Unilever for, at that point of time, maybe 20 years. But he was someone who within Unilever had always picked the unusual roles. Whenever they wanted to try out something new, he was the first one to put on his hand. And he had therefore gone. Now, someone like that, moving them from Unilever to a younger, more agile organization works, because he had that learning agility even within a broader setup, right? But, that's what, as a search consultant, you have to be able to assess those finer nuances.
Understood. And some of these attributes, nuances, are candidates aware of it, or can they pick up those skills? Or what is your experience on the other side been?
So this is the classic nature versus nurture debate that always happens. How much is intrinsic to the person? How much is... I think people can pick up certain experiences. They certainly should look for experiences. They should look for opportunities. They should look at mentors who can help guide them. Changing attributes requires a certain amount of self-awareness. Not everybody is willing to go through that journey. If you have someone who is open, wanting to, A, self-aware, B, wanting to change, willing to listen to feedback and actually implement change, then yes, absolutely, they can learn things that you would never have imagined when they started out. And in that, coaching becomes a very, very useful tool
Okay.
to help them through that journey, because it becomes a safe mirror that helps them walk through that and provide tools.
So at very senior levels, is it EQ or IQ or both, or which one has slight edge?
Certainly both.
Hmm.
I think you can't operate at the highest level without IQ in terms of knowledge, etc. But more and more in today's world, EQ has become an equal element of that. Earlier, I would have said it was more IQ with a little bit of EQ. Today, it's 50-50 between them. Yeah. There's
Okay. Now, in all your years of being in this industry, what is that one thing? And I'm assuming most of the senior levels, senior executives have an MBA. What is it one or two things they don't teach in MBA schools that are relevant to a CEO role or a CXO role?
Oh my God. That's a long list you're asking for. I don't think I can keep it to one or two.
Okay, give me at least top 3, 4.
Okay. Okay, so let's pick up the EQ, IQ we just talked about. I think MBA schools focus on IQ, right? They don't spend as much time talking about EQ. And with EQ becoming more and more critical, I think that's something that they have to find ways to incorporate into the business. I think stakeholder management is another big one that they don't teach you in MBA school. And today, the complexity of stakeholder management. So whether you are talking internally, of course, to your teams, etc., whether you are talking to a promoter or a global matrix CEO, functional head, whatever, whether you are talking to investors, whether you're talking to regulatory, you're talking, I mean, it's a huge number of stakeholders that a CEO has to manage today. And you have to manage them all at once.
Yeah.
And they are at odds to each other sometimes. So that is a skill that certainly you don't learn, and it hits a lot of people by surprise the first time they become a CEO. Particularly for a CEO, in a promoter context, it doesn't teach you how to disagree with the promoter without blowing up trust.
Okay,
And it's something that more and more CEOs have to be able to do today when they step into the issues. It doesn't teach you how to be necessarily humble.
Okay.
So humility, and MBAs teach you you're the best, and it's a great thing to teach you because that's. But as a CEO, humility is a very powerful tool, which more people should use more effectively. So I think that's still under the radar. It doesn't teach you how lonely that position is.
Okay.
When you become a CEO, it's very isolating.
True.
Because you get surrounded by people who are not necessarily giving you the most honest feedback. They all have their agendas, motives, etc. And therefore, getting honest feedback is something that becomes harder and harder, right? You're also responsible for a lot more, and therefore there's a weight on your shoulders that comes from that. So there's a loneliness and isolation that we see as you move further up to the top. I can keep going. There's many things, but yeah, it's
Okay. So I'll flip the question now.
Mm.
Obviously with your experience, what are the top reasons or why CEOs get fired?
Okay. Integrity.
Okay, that's
Number one.
That's obvious. Okay.
And today integrity.
Any crazy cases where
Well, at Coldplay, and I don't need to say more there. But I think what's happened is earlier you could have
the Coldplay concert with the CEO got caught up.
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah. So earlier you could have a situation where you had a public persona or a work persona and a private persona. Today that doesn't exist. Today you are in the public eye all the time, right? So integrity in your personal life, lack of integrity in your personal life can have an impact on your professional life, right? As the Coldplay or the many Me Too situations that we saw, right? Of course, integrity when it comes to actual business dealings, etc., is critical. So I would say that is certainly one. Two, I would say, is performance or lack of performance. That is a more obvious one again. Three, I would say, is the inability to understand context. So you could have a CEO who's been hired, whose personal style is come in and change everything, bull in China shop, just hit. And that's his approach. It may have worked very well in his prior company, but that may not be what the new company needs, right? If he has not assessed the context, if he has not assessed the situation, and of course it's a failing on the people hiring him as well. But if he has not done that and he starts coming in and creating havoc, very often that will make boards very uncomfortable, and they might pull the trigger. So these are sort of some of the more obvious ones that.
Any specific examples of the third one where the bull in a China shop example he gave me? I know there are a lot of examples in the media, but
You're asking me to share things which I can't. But
you have some.
But no. So let me try and think of. I'm trying to think of a specific one that I can name, and unfortunately, that's where the problem comes up. I didn't think of. No, let's just say that there are many such examples of not necessarily a bull in a China shop. Sometimes it's just about not understanding some of the dynamics within an organization. So you could have a generational dynamic going on, which if you haven't realized that there is, and you've come in, you've got hired by the second generation, you've not necessarily met the first generation, but the first generation still has a hold in the business, and you kind of clash. That could create.
Think of examples those in the media, but
That's an industry which has seen a fair amount of that kind of
their part also.
it is an industry where you see some of that. Or sometimes you have a situation where the person gets hired and the context changes, right? You have a new investor who comes in, or there's a takeover of the business that happens, right? And it's not the CEO's fault because that's not the mandate. But if they don't have the agility to change along with that quickly, there's a culture mismatch that happens. And that's when a lot of changes take place.
Now let's talk about another interesting topic, which is CEO compensation. So that's a big one. When the media plays out, so many crores of rupees, whatever else. Talk us through the process of CXO compensation. What are the different components to it, and what are the other frills that they get, and some insane frills that somebody's demanding?
Okay, let me first talk about structure. So typically compensation has three broad buckets. There is your fixed compensation, and that includes your base salary, it includes HRA, it includes all your allowances, all your resources, it includes perquisites, it includes retirals, right? So that's your fixed compensation. The second component will be your annual variable pay or your performance pay. This is typically a short-term incentive of some sort. And the third, which has become very common now and wasn't the case maybe 10 years ago, is the long-term incentive, whether that is ESOPs, which is one of the most common tools, or it is linked to KRAs and payouts that happen, right? But these are the sort of three broad buckets of compensation. And when it comes to CEO compensation, all three buckets are important, right? It is important for the company to be clear not just of the overall compensation number that they want to offer, but how it breaks down between these three. So I'll give you a couple of examples what I mean by this. I remember we were doing a very large CHRO search for a very, very large global company. And perfect candidate. The candidate loved them, they loved the candidate. Everything was going great. Multiple rounds of interviews. And then it came to the compensation. Now, upfront, we had outlined what the person's current compensation was and broad level what they were looking at, which had been okay. So there was no problem there. But when they actually provided an offer, the candidate came back saying, hey, you know what? The overall number is fine. I don't have an issue with it. But I don't need a house. I have my own house in Bombay. And I don't need a car because I have my own car. Can I get cash instead? right? Fair ask. Unfortunately, being the very large global organization it was, they didn't have that flexibility.
Okay.
The value they would put against house and car was far lower than the value if you actually took the house and car.
Got it.
We battled it out.
Mm.
And the person said, look, I'm okay with the overall number. I'm happy to do this. I want to do the job. They could not reach a solution and it fell apart, right? So that happens. The other one that happens is we did another big CEO search. And the final candidate that they were hiring had actually spent in the last 3 years, had worked across 3 different geographies, 3 different countries. And therefore, his compensation was so complicated by the end of it because being a CEO at that level, you get a lot of expat perks depending on which country you are, your incentives. So he actually had 3 different currencies on his compensation. And India would have been the 4th currency in it. Just putting together that data on a sheet that would make sense to everybody and would be comparable to what he could expect in India was a project on its own, right? Because what conversion rate do you take? What date do you take? Everything's dynamic. Everything changes. He got paid. Taxation is different in the different stints.
Got it.
It can be a very, very complex piece of the whole puzzle.
Generally, when a normal person changes a job, is expecting 25-30% increment. What is the increment a CXO or CEO level guys expect?
Depends. Okay. Again, context, right? I think a traditional between 20 and 30% is a good hike. However, you could have time of year. So if someone is making a change, let's say in February, March, you have an increment cycle coming up. So they want to factor that in and then get the increase. There will be losses of bonus that happens, for example, which has to, at a CEO level, certainly gets factored in. There will be loss of vesting shares that will have to be. So there's a lot of other factors that will also play a part. So it's not necessarily a direct percentage. Obviously, also as you go higher, your compensation numbers are higher. So percentages can be misleading.
Got it.
Right? In the sense that, percentage of a larger number is a much larger number than, people may be willing to look at a smaller percentage, but an actual higher number. And then you have people who come up with crazy asks, right? So we had one situation where we had a candidate who said, I need a 60% hike. Okay, that's very nice. I'd love one too. Why do you need a 60% hike? And usually your justifications will be, I'm either underpaid in my current job or I'm moving to a more complex job, or it's a higher risk situation, etc. And so we were expecting one of those answers. And to be fair, he was very candid and he said, because from my batch of business school, the highest paid person is on X salary.
Oh.
And I am currently number 3. I need to be number 1. And we're like, okay, now tell us why the company should care about that, right? What is the logic for this? So, people can have all kinds of
Learn vanity over there.
absolutely. And, as it is part of our role to also bring those expectations to some sort of reality. People also don't understand sometimes how, for example, the ESOPs work. So they will give you a value for the ESOPs, but actually what they're getting is only the difference in the value. They're not getting that whole value.
Yeah.
But in their head, they think they are making that kind of money, right? So you have to walk through a lot of those scenarios and explain to people that, look, this is the reality. This is what you currently make. This is what you can hope to increase. This is what industry pays. So equivalent companies, what are they paying, right? So it can't just be a pie in the sky.
Absolutely.
It has to be grounded on some reality.
So Toral, give us some specific numbers at a CEO for a retail industry and a retail company, a fairly large retail company. I'm just making it up, maybe it's a listed company. What kind of salaries do people get in rupees?
So again, sorry to say this, but Gautam, everything comes back to context.
Yeah.
So a lot of factors matter. So I'm giving you very broad parameters because again, depending on the industry you're in, depending.
So do you mean top 3 or 4
complexity.
industries that you managed? And
So if I take retail, for example, I would say there are, and actually retail, a lot of industries can fall in this. There would be sort of 3 buckets. One is the 10 crore plus compensation, right? And that plus can go very plus.
how much is the plus?
Let's say 14, 15, 17 crores is not unusual.
Okay.
Okay. I'm not talking of the absolute 5 top names in the country. Those are way higher, right? But, 15, 20 crores is
And 15, 20 crores is what? Everything put together?
Everything put together.
Okay.
Obviously, there is differing values on different pieces, which will keep changing. But yes, I mean, that's quite possible to get. Then you have what we call the sort of 5 crore to 10 crore kind of CEOs. And they will be handling not the largest companies, but the next tier of companies. And, again, there's a mix of how much of that is long-term, how much of that is short-term, how much of that is annuals. And then you'll have typically the 2.5 to 5 crore range of compensation. So these would be sort of 3 broad buckets from a CEO compensation. The smallest one is, of course, for smaller entities, first-time CEOs that are moving into that, etc.
And which industries are the highest pay masters?
It used to be investment banking at one time because the bonuses were crazy and they continue to be. But I think most industries, the top jobs are pretty high paying. Getting those top jobs is the hard part. So an unusual one, which you won't expect, is real estate.
Oh, really? Okay.
Real estate is a very well-paying industry, actually. They pay senior leadership extremely well because they see that, one wrong mistake can actually set them back a huge amount because it's a very capex-heavy business. So they will pay their CEOs well, they will pay their CFOs well, and now more and more their heads of projects, etc. They will pay well. So that's an unusual one, and that's why I mentioned it. The consumer industry is being the evergreen, industry. So it's always paid pretty decently. Today, I would say the ones that are that have changed is actually Indian promoter companies.
Okay.
They're actually paying extremely well. They're very competitive versus the multinational global salaries. So there was a time when people would make a move or aspire to make a move to a multinational for compensation, better perquisites. Today, that's not the case. It's very much a level playing field. And, in fact, Indian promoters are able to provide more innovative compensation. So that's been a definite change.
So, Toral, let's talk about salary compensation and negotiation. The negotiation is a big part of this whole process. How does one negotiate? And any examples of a candidate who's been an excellent negotiator?
So I think there are a few things here. One is obviously you have your own base, what your current numbers are, and that forms part of the discussion. It's important to have a sense of what does industry pay for that job, and each industry has its own sort of norms, benchmarks, etc. It's important to, when you are going through the process of the job, to understand what has this company traditionally paid for this job. And today that data is much more easily available in different formats. It's important to know how you see the split. Are you willing, for example, to give up some of the short term for the long term, right? Because that's becoming a big factor. A lot of companies are very happy to give more compensation that is more tied into performance, right? So you need to be clear on what is the ask that I have, and what do I need to manage, right? You need to understand how much in demand your skills are. Okay. If it's a skill set that is in abundance, the chances are a negotiation can break down pretty quickly if you get too greedy. Right? Whereas if you have a specialist skill that is particularly interesting to this company, chances are they'll push that out a little bit more than they would otherwise. You have to see the context of what. So, for example, not always, but a lot of multinationals will have set norms on what they can and cannot pay. Whereas Indian companies will have a little more flexibility around it, right? So you have to understand that dynamic as well. Your best friend in this process is your search partner.
Acha.
Because assume you've gone through these 2, 3, 4 rounds of meetings, gone through the whole process. You're the final candidate. They like you, you like them, everything's great. Your search partner is the one who actually has an inkling of what both sides want.
Correct.
Right? And they can help you navigate to a win-win for both. Right? Ultimately, you don't want to join a company at a salary which is so much higher than they wanted to pay that they watch you like a hawk on every little thing because they want value. Right? Now, you have to be able to demonstrate why your compensation is value and not cost.
Correct. Absolutely.
Right? And I
That's
think
one good one you said.
And I think that's where, if you have a search partner involved in the process, very useful to kind of chat with them, be honest, be real about what you really want and what your actual ask is, as opposed to putting up a number just for the sake of it.
Now, when you say search partner, it's typically traditionally understood that corporations or companies hire search partners.
Yes.
Have you had a situation where an individual C-level leader has hired a search partner?
They've tried.
Has that worked?
No,
the reverse,
they
reverse way?
tried. Unfortunately, it doesn't work because the search partner doesn't have or can't create a job to give the person. Right? So the hiring company is the one that has the jobs, and hence it's, they're the ones who can pay. People have tried different models over the years. I wouldn't recommend it. So.
Okay. So now some specific examples. Okay. Now you always hear about situations where somebody's accepted the job. He was supposed to land up tomorrow for the job, and last moment, he's gone.
Oh God, these are the ones we hate. Okay, let me try and give you. So I think the bottom line is, at the end of the day, we're dealing with human beings. Okay. And therefore they come with their own quirks and idiosyncrasies, etc. So we had a scenario where large real estate company, we had placed their head of the company. He had a good run, 6, 7 years. He was moving on to do something else. And they came to us for the replacement. It was a complex search. There was a lot of elements to it. We finally brought it down to a final candidate, negotiated hard, agreed on the numbers. He had a 3-month notice period, which he said, look, they may extend it to 4 months because promoters are involved, etc. It was agreed. As he moved through the process, and this is where we play a significant part as well, we got the distinct impression that there was something not right. Everything had been agreed. He had even sent us his resignation letter. We knew that this particular corporate he works with has a habit of holding back people at the last minute. And we knew how important he was to them. The signals we were getting, just the conversations, etc., were not necessarily the most effective. However, he kept assuring us, I'm on, I'm going to be there. It's a question of maybe 10 days later, 15 days later, etc. Long story short, the day he was supposed to be on board, not only did he not join, but he ghosted us. He ghosted the client. He ghosted our calls. He just wouldn't answer his calls. And I think, to me, that is unpardonable, right? You can have a situation where someone who says, yes, I'm interested in a job, does a first round meeting, finds the chemistry is not right, finds it's not quite what he wants to do, that's okay. You drop out at that stage, it's fine. Ideally, of course, you do all your homework up front before the first meeting. But if you take a process all the way through and you have a company that is waiting for you for 3 months, right? They have now stopped the process for all other people that they had as backups. 3 months later, everything has changed in those people's lives, and you now don't show up. That is absolutely unforgivable. And more than that, you don't answer the calls, right? At a senior level, it's
Did the manager speak to him again?
let's just say he tried and I refused to speak to him. He's blacklisted in our firm. There's no way we will represent him. And you know, it was just, I think you have to be honest in that process. Of course, when you, let's say you've accepted a job and your current employer comes back with something which is a counter offer and it's attractive, have the ability to have that conversation. Talk to your search partner, talk to the hiring manager, saying, look, they've come back with this. It is interesting. It's exciting. They're giving me more money. They're matching the money. They're also giving me a larger scope of role, etc. And I'm confused. Give them a chance to counter that.
Correct.
You know, don't vanish.
Yes. Okay. Toral, any specific example where on somebody's negotiated more than that was on the table? If there was X, the guy managed to get X plus Y.
So again, happens more often than people think because especially at CEO level, compensation is flexible. It's not like companies are saying this to this is my budget and I can't move. For the right person, it's too critical a role. They'll move the needle a little bit. But an interesting, very different one, and I'll take it a little sideways on this, was actually a CEO of a media company who had a contract renewal coming up, right? And I was pleasantly surprised because what do most people do? They say, okay, contract renewal coming up, I will talk to them and whatever, agree, disagree. He actually did some serious homework. He reached out to people he knew. He obviously had some data points of competitors. He reached out to people like us, gathered information of what are industry norms, data points, etc. He then spent time looking at what does he bring to the table that is unique, what is the performance he's actually already provided to the company, what is the path that he's already laid out, and therefore how important is he to the company. Third, he actually spent time asking for feedback on his own profile. What are things that he could do better? Okay, this is someone who is incredibly loved internally, but hadn't spent time building an external profile as much as the person could have, right? He not only asked for the feedback, he actually listened and implemented some of those changes. So when it came for time for the renewal discussion, he treated it like a business case, like a acquisition of a company, right? And he put as much thought and process behind it as he would have when he was acquiring an entity for themselves. And
so basically, he was super prepared. He did his homework, so he got more than what was
absolutely.
More than
Absolutely.
I just dive back a little bit in the interest of time. Coming back to the recruitment industry, can you just sort of explain to us how does this process work? What are the compensation or the pricing structures for our industry?
For our industry.
How does it work? Is it a retainer basis? It is a fixed fee? What happens if a candidate disappears at the last moment? Does the fee vanish off?
Okay. So if you remember at the start, I talked about the pyramid of recruitment services. So I'm going to focus on the top end of that pyramid because that's where we operate. So the way we work is always on a retained model. Every mandate we run is a retained project, right? What that means is we will, when we start the mandate, we will discuss with the client what is the potential or what we call the estimated compensation. And then our fee is a percentage of that compensation. So we charge 33.33, a third of annual compensation. as our fee structure. Different firms will have slightly different models, but the big firms in the industry will typically be on a 1/3 model. This is then broken up into tranches. So you'll have 3 tranches of a third each. So let me simplify this. If, let's say, the compensation number is 100, the search firm's fee will be 33.33. This will get billed 1/3, so 11.11 as tranche 1 upfront. Another tranche, second tranche of 11.11 will get billed normally on a combination of time and milestone. So in our case, 30 days from the start of the search or shortlist, whichever is earlier. That's a standard thing. The third tranche of another 11.11 will get billed on 60 days or an offer acceptance. Okay. And then there is a fourth tranche if finally they hire someone at more than 100. So let's say they hire someone at 150. Then on the differential 50 lakhs, you will get your fourth tranche when the person joins the organization. Then there's taxes and there's expenses.
Okay, so that's the model.
So that's the top end of the pyramid, right? Then as you go down the pyramid, it ranges from that 33.33 all the way down to 5% also at the absolute bottom product level, right? So it depends where you're playing and what you're doing. And again, typically the top 2 tiers will have some retainer. The top tier will always have a 3-stage plus 1 retainer. The next phase will usually have a small retainer upfront and the rest on success. And the third tier is usually completely success.
In your, because you've got a body of experience over the last 3 decades, what are the 3 or 4 things that make a successful candidate or a successful career? At the top level, what are the attributes? We spoke about it, but if you were to sort of just summarize it.
Okay, so I think first is consistency of performance or consistency of effort in performance. Let me put it this way, right? Because track record matters, right, for a successful career. I would say the second is people skills, just the ability to deal with people. This is not just your own teams, but also stakeholders, external, etc., is a very, very key aspect in today's day and age. Third, I would probably say reputation, integrity. So integrity of what you do, how you do it, what are your values, how do you go about things. I would say these are sort of 3 things that cut across, everything and is important in a typical career trajectory. Yeah, I mean, there are lots of others. There's, learning agility, all that is there. But these are 3 I would pick as the top 3.
Do most CEOs deserve the salary that they take? What's your opinion on that?
Actually, honestly, the answer is yes. And I'll tell you why I say that. Today, the CEO's job, the world is extremely complex. The CEO's job is more complex than most people realize. One is, of course, the complexity of the actual business they operate in. But with the kind of headwinds of the ambiguity that operates in the market today, being able to juggle all the balls in the air at the same time, being able to switch on a dime when some new geopolitical thing happens or, COVID happens and something that nobody could ever imagine hits the business and still take the company forward is not easy to do. So today I would say do CEOs deserve what they make? Absolutely.
What is one hiring mistake that companies make again and again while hiring top leadership? And you've seen that pattern in some industries more than others.
I think hiring for qualifications, it's like, okay, as you know, I like art, right? When the only time in my life I have bought a piece of art that I would willingly sell is when I bought it for a signature rather than for the intrinsic joy of what that art piece brought. And I think the same thing happens in companies. They get enamored by qualifications, by the name of the company the person has worked for, the catch that they will be, but they forget to look at context, right? And I think that is the single biggest mistake they can make.
Any example over there?
I'll add one piece to that
Sure.
before I give you an example. Also, doing your homework on or referencing on a person is a very critical element. Personality styles, how they operate, these are all critical as you move up the chain, because again, the more senior you get, the less actual doing you do and more of managing, leading, guiding that you do, right? So we had a situation where we hired for a retail company. I won't name them, and they were looking for a CMO. We looked at the industry, whatever, found someone. We had a couple of people. One was more senior, brought a lot of stuff on the table, on paper. The other was a little more of a learning curve situation. And they decided to go with the senior. Nothing wrong with that. However, then we did some referencing. And the referencing threw up issues. It threw up some very specific issues, which we relayed to the client. But the client by then had fallen in love with the candidate, had decided this was the candidate they wanted. And so they ignored a lot of that. They did address it with the person, but they chose to go ahead. Cool. 6 months later, they had to part ways because of the same issues that came out in the check. So, yeah, that can happen.
So, Toral, as we wrap it up, one last question. In your experience, do you think the CEOs who have reached, or CXOs, when they start out, did they realize they would reach their top job, or they were ambition driven? Was it destiny? What was it? If somebody is 25 years old and he says, okay, I want to be a CEO, is it destiny? Is it hard work? Obviously, hard work is there, but is it destiny, or is it, what is it?
So,
or you have sort of, you may have the right, education at the Dream Institute, so that's one part of it, and then there's a drive, ambition, destiny.
So all of those. I think it is everything you do, all your experiences, both qualification-wise and job experiences, combined with someone who has the ability to look at opportunities and context. So let me give you an example of that. You can't have someone saying, I want to be the CEO of a large global company, but I'm not willing to move out of India. Right? Because they're two contradictory things. Now, it's very obvious, but sometimes you will find people who in those middle years, when there are young kids, spouses working, etc., who will say, I can't move, right? Which is fun. There's no issue. There are enough jobs here. But then don't aspire for that job. Because if you haven't done the movement within a large global organization, you're not going to get that big job there. So you have to be realistic about what you're aspiring for. And you have to then chart your journey a little mindfully. I get very surprised actually when I meet a lot of CEOs who, if you ask them a simple question of what are your 3 dream jobs, they don't have the answer.
Oh, really?
They don't have the answer. They haven't thought it through. They're so busy, and you can't blame them. They're doing very tough jobs which keep them very busy, but they haven't spent the time that they spend running a company, or the mindfulness they bring to running a company, they don't spend on their own careers necessarily as much. And I think that's something people are now learning to do because there's that much more.
You think you can sort of faff your way through the top?
You can't faff your way. Oh, okay, let me put it this way. Let me put it this way. You may somehow manage to faff your way through a journey, but you get caught out at some point. It won't last very long. So, you won't end up being that very successful CEO that everyone looks up to. Do you fake it till you make it on certain little bits? Probably. There are things, nobody knows everything, right? There are learning curves, there are things you do. And sometimes you have to be ready to embrace that and jump out a little further than your comfort zone would be. But you can't faff your way into the big top jobs.
Perfect. All right. On that note, thank you, Toral. Thanks for spending the time with us.
Thank you,
Pleasure
Gautam.
having me here.
Likewise,
Thank
pleasure
you.
meeting you. And
you.
all the best for the sell side.
Thank you.